everyone. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, a special one-time Wednesday DFS version. I am Scott Jenstad, joined as always on the DFS podcast by Andrew Laird. We figured with the Thanksgiving slate, the 3 games this week coming up, we'll do 2 podcasts this week. I somehow convinced Andrew to talk to me twice in a week, which was no easy task. It took a lot of talking to him and convincing him that he'll be okay. I'll pay for the therapy bills later. So, Andrew, how are you this morning?
Good. These podcasts are easily the worst of my week, so just being able to trudge through another one with you is I've already asked for a raise, so we'll see what happens.
That's good. I get beat up like that a lot in my house, so it's good to get beat up. I really appreciate that.
Sure thing.
So we got 3 games on Thursday. I really like this slate. Like, we talk a bunch, and you write the Showdown articles for RotoWire, and those articles are really good and kind of the reason I play Showdown sometimes. I read them, I'm like, I should toss a team in. But I play those for fun. I play those for, like, it's Monday night, and I want to be able to root for some guys in the game. But this slate I like. It's 3 games. It's almost like a playoff slate where we get the 4 games. But these are all in one day. Like, those playoff slates are split up in 2 days, and kind of a pain when you have half your scoring and the games start the next day. But three games in a day is fun. They're back to back to back. Nothing overlaps. I wish we had better football games, to be honest with you. Like, we have. Anytime 33% of the teams playing are NFC East teams, it's not going to be a good slate. But we've got like an interesting. We have Houston, Detroit, which is like bad teams, high scoring. We've got Washington, Dallas, which is bad teams, low scoring. And then we got Baltimore, Pittsburgh at night. Like, it's I know it's not quite as sexy as maybe it was a few weeks ago with Baltimore looking bad and a couple of their running backs out. But anytime Baltimore and Pittsburgh play, like that's a pretty fun game and one you want to tune in to watch.
Yeah, for sure. If Villanova basketball wasn't scheduled to play at 9:30 on Thanksgiving night, then I would probably really take in that Baltimore-Pittsburgh one.
I looked up, like I was like, oh, but college basketball started. I looked up the schedule. There's like 55 games today.
There were 120, and now
it's true too. There's a lot of all these teams are playing. Stanford's playing in Maui, I think, next weekend, so I'm looking forward to that. I think they're playing Alabama, and then
are they actually in Maui though?
I don't know. That's a really good question.
No, I think the Maui one got moved to North Dakota.
Wow, that's like the worst.
I don't think it's actually North Dakota, but it's definitely not Maui.
Being a kid, you're like, oh my God, we're going to Maui for this trip, and you end up in Fargo.
Yeah.
That would be the worst turn of events ever.
I don't think it's actually in a Dakota,
sorry, Fargo residents. I just meant that.
That's true.
It's not Maui joke than anything else.
Right. The college basketball season will be interesting, but for football, so like we have this playoff slate with the Cowboys, the Lions, the football team. We were talking just very briefly before we started recording, and we were like, wait, let's hold this, because you thought they really blew it on the pricing. And I was going to make the joke that like all it took was a 3-game slate with these garbage teams for Deshaun Watson to finally be more than 7,000.
Right. Yeah.
That we've been like railing against all year. We'll get to quarterbacks in a little bit, but like the fact that he's not like 9,000 on a 3-game slate against Detroit is crazy.
And the thing is, we don't have like any Devontae Adams types, Dalvin Cook. There's nobody, so they should have bumped everybody up 1,000. Like it's not fully you can play exactly everybody you want, and there's no salary cap implications, but it's pretty darn close to that. Like, you're going to have to hit the right guys, because I played with it last night, and it's funny because there's a couple cheap guys I like, and I'm like, I don't really need both of them. Like, you just need one cheap guy frees up to kind of. I had to line up with Watson and the top 3 receivers, and it kind of worked pretty easily. So it's going to be picking the right guys, which it always is, but even more so this week because you're not going to have to worry as much about salary. But I think that with no pure studs on the slate, I think they should have just bumped up everybody a little bit to make it a little more difficult. But the pricing's the same for everybody, so it's kind of the way it's going to be, and it's weird without having like a couple of the really big studs anywhere though.
Yeah, we talk about DraftKings' dynamic pricing a lot on for soccer slates because they just move so heavily based on betting odds, and obviously they do in football as well. But it's not. I mean, it's very drastic in soccer that a guy could be 5,600 one week and 8,600 the next, and like really nothing has changed other than the opponent. But I feel
like this week needed that. They needed a drastic move.
So I agree with you. But then the more I thought of it, I was thinking like if there are so many casual people playing on Thanksgiving, making it difficult to not get all the guys you want may push people away. But ultimately, like, we're probably going to see just some extremely chalky guys because it's so easy to play. Somebody reached out to us on Twitter talking about whether this was a good slate for cash games because it's only 3 games, which is funny because for me at least, I play soccer cash games, which like the main slate every week this season has been a 3-game slate. Kind of just like this. It's 3 staggered starts. It's for soccer, that's awful, but like 3 games actually doesn't seem that bad to me. I think it's perfect for cash games only because we don't have so many decisions to make. Like I always talk about, like, you want to lower the player pool when you're trying to build a cash lineup. And obviously going from 11 games to 3 games really helps that just naturally. And I think that there are certain players on this slate that everybody's going to focus on in cash games. And then that just naturally puts you in certain salary tiers. And then it's, do I want one of these 2 guys? Like for GPP, it's obvious who you can fade. But cash games, I think, generally are going to be pretty tight this week just because of that. And for somebody like me who, I don't know if I prefer cash games, but I play them, it's just, it makes the decisions a little easier. So that's why it's perfectly fine to play cash on Thanksgiving Day.
I think you might see a lot of lineups that are like, 2v2 cash is pretty much like Steelers receiver A or B and a defense and like different. Like there's going to be a lot of similarities. But yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. As long as you pick those similarities well. But I'll be playing mostly GPP on the shorter slate. I don't love the high percentages, but you're a better cash player than I am, and you're good with that. I play cash in the bigger slates, but I'll be playing less this week. I'll be playing more GPPs, but that's a good answer. I'm glad you saw that because I wanted to ask you that because you were the perfect person to answer that, not me. So let's jump into running backs. We have I think nobody over 6,800. You made a joke last week about Ezekiel Elliott and what price we have to be to play him, and here's your answer. The answer wasn't the price. The answer was probably a number of games involved. But Zeke is 6,800 against the Washington football team. He actually broke out a little bit last week. 21 for 103. They won the game against the Vikings with Andy Dalton back. Also had a receiving touchdown. Are you playing Zeke? 6,800. He's a home favorite. He was really bad for 4 weeks before last week. You mentioned cash lineups. Do you think he's super popular this week with the lack of running backs on the slate?
I think a lot of it has to do with DeAndre Swift and whether he plays or not. As of
for sure
Wednesday at 11:15 a.m. on the East Coast, he has not been cleared. He returned to practice in a limited fashion apparently on Tuesday, although I don't know if they actually practiced or that was like the estimated whatever.
Right. But I don't think he's going to play, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll certainly have him if he plays, but that's a tough turnaround on a concussion week. Like I think it's gonna be hard to get him cleared.
Yeah, I assume we would find out early enough, but it also helps that Detroit's the first game anyway, so we'll know right away.
I assume we'll know at some point today, which is Wednesday.
Wednesday, right? So I think Elliott's popularity goes down as Swift plays because I think everybody should play Swift. I will say when I started building my lineup, and when you realize very quickly that you're not going to have to make many tough decisions in terms of like, do I have to get a $3,000? Do I have to get KJ Hamler or whoever the Thanksgiving Day KJ Hamler is?
Shouts out to KJ Hamler, best receiver in the NFL. Go ahead.
But I actually found myself willing to get rid of Elliott before my other guys. And so I think Elliott is going to be really popular, but I also think you might be able to build a better lineup without him. And so obviously Swift plays a part of that, but even without Swift, it just depends on how much you're willing to stomach the cheaper guys that have disappointed us so consistently this season, particularly Duke Johnson and James Conner, who if you build a lineup with those two, good luck.
That's the tough part. Is like usually I'm like, oh, Duke Johnson. Now I used to like James Conner. Now I'm like, we'll toss him out. You can't do it on a 3-game slate. You just can't toss anybody fully out like that. There's other part with Zeke too. Is Washington's defense is good. They haven't allowed anyone over 85 yards rushing since week 3 when Nick Chubb had 100. But DeAndre Swift, you mentioned he was really good against them 2 weeks ago, kind of catching the ball and running the ball. But overall, they've been pretty good. Zeke was 12 for 45 yards the first game they played against Washington. The Cowboys did not play well in that game. I'll just say this: Zeke's way more on my radar than he would be normally. Obviously, I think the point you made on Swift is kind of what I was going to say. Like he's 6,500. I think that makes a big difference on Zeke's ownership this week. I think that Swift against Houston, we've talked about all year about Houston giving up a ton of big plays in the running game. I think that if Swift plays, he's pretty easy for me too, just based on the matchup. But since I'll stick with that matchup, Adrian Peterson, some people played last week at 4,000 on DraftKings. He was absolutely ridiculously awful, and he just, AP is an all-timer, and I like calling him AP, not AD. I do that on purpose. He's an all-timer. It's just not there anymore. Kerryon Johnson's bad. Like I think if Swift doesn't play, I'm just going to kind of take this running back situation and throw it away. I'm not going to play any of them.
I had a number of head-to-heads last week that played Peterson. And I was going through, and I had like 4 in a row that I was playing against Peterson. And I was like, all right, I'm going to win that. Like, I don't even have to look. And then the 5th one had Kerryon Johnson instead. And I'm just like,
wow,
these are not decisions that we need to make this week.
You only play head-to-heads with people locally in Detroit?
Yeah, right. I will say if you're in cash games and you play like a bunch of double-ups, you should definitely like post head-to-heads because you'll play more people who play Adrian Peterson on an 11-game slate. But anyway, when you go to the RotoWire DVP page, which is based on just like fantasy points allowed, so no team has allowed more DraftKings fantasy points to running backs than the Lions, and second most of the Texans. So like there's your Duke Johnson and Adrian Peterson, which I just don't see how you go there in cash because like the matchup is there. It's like a David Montgomery syndrome. Ironically, the Packers have given up the 3rd most. The Packers play the Bears this week, so Montgomery theoretically would be the 3rd. But it's like I think you're just giving up too much. Like I get like the opportunity, and but I just don't see how you go there. Which helps Elliott. Like I think people are like not begrudgingly playing Elliott, but I think we're going to end up with that if Swift sits because you don't really want to go in with one of Peterson or Kerryon Johnson or Duke or Connor, and like we're just running out of guys at this point.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to play someone in that range.
Right.
Duke's 5,700 on DraftKings. He was brutal last week against the Patriots. 10 carries for 15 yards, 3 receptions for 20 yards, and they just with Deshaun Watson, I think they're just like, forget it. We'll just have Deshaun run. We'll have Deshaun pass, and like they're just so much more efficient when the ball's in his hands without David Johnson there. They were using more, but it just doesn't make sense to feed Duke Johnson when you have a weapon like Watson. You have Fuller, you have Cooks, you have all those guys on the outside, and I mean their tight ends played well last week. They're just such a better offense when they're not handing the ball to Duke Johnson that it's hard. Like he's had bulk opportunities the last 3 weeks. He has 40 carries for 110 yards. Like that's not even 3 yards per carry. Like maybe get me to like 3.5, and that's bad, but at least I can like think about it. But at 2.8 or whatever that is, like, and he only has 7 catches in that span too. It's not like the problem is he's running the ball a bunch, and they're not using him in that 3rd down role, and it just doesn't work. He's playing a lot, just not doing a thing. But you mentioned the Lions; they've given up 19 touchdowns to running backs on the year. Like it's crazy that someone's worse than Houston in fantasy points, but they are. So as we get down here, the guy that we come down to is Antonio Gibson at Dallas, 6,000 on DraftKings, 6,800 on FanDuel. He scored in 4 straight games. He has 5 touchdowns in that stretch. I want to hear what you have to say about Gibson before I mention what I'm doing with him this week.
I think it turns to be like a process of elimination, and he's like the last guy standing. Maybe not the last, but like just like we went through the list, like you're throwing out so many guys. Right. We'll obviously get to the Baltimore situation in a minute, but like the Steelers have been awesome against the run. So like I don't know,
except the one Ravens game.
Well, right, but like
that
wasn't necessarily the running backs that we have to consider in this game. So like I think Gibson becomes like the popular play. Like Dallas has just been awful everywhere. Although Dalvin Cook didn't have the explosive game that we were expecting last week, at least in terms like I think everybody just had like full ceiling projection and was like, that's what's going to happen. And like he was good, but like not as humongously huge as we were expecting. But I think Gibson's going to be really popular. And like, I don't think it's crazy that he could be more popular than Elliott. Maybe the number of casual people who are like, oh, it's Zeke. Like, of course I'll play him, push him higher. But I think Gibson will be really popular this week.
You know what's weird about that Dalvin Cook game is I thought the same thing. And then and everybody had him, so I didn't really look that closely. I thought the same thing, and I looked at my lineup. He had 29 points last week in DraftKings.
Yeah, but
it felt like he left a lot on the table. It was weird. Like,
yes.
You're expecting so much, and then you look up, you're like, oh, 20 points. That's pretty freaking awesome. But I just felt like there was more there too. It's weird. Like, I think it's just he never had that like one big.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I needed my 60-yard touchdown.
That breakaway play, but it's weird that like he's just so good that he does that. But
so you know what it was is that we were texting about it, and we were like at the end of the game, we're like, now we need the 65-yard Dalvin Cook touchdown, and then they threw to him once, and then it was a 3 and out. And it was like, I guess he had a bad game.
Phillip Rivers to not stop throwing the ball to freaking Michael Pittman because the dude's awesome.
Jeez.
Sorry. So here's my thing with Gibson. I think he's a big GPP fade for me this week. I think he's going to be really popular. But I look at his games, and you got the last 6 rushing games. You have the 128 and the 94 in there, games that they won. The other 4 games, 27 yards rushing, 30, 45, and 20. Like 4 terrible games. They were helped by the rushing touchdowns. I get that. He's never been over 35 snaps. He's only been over 16 carries once. So the talent is there. He only has 10 targets the last 4 weeks. They obviously don't use him like that way. You use J.D. McKissick that way. But I think Washington has to win the game for Antonio Gibson to work. They're going to feed him late. I just think that he's an interesting fade for me because I think that I don't love the overall usage, and I understand that he could have a big game and they could take the lead. He could break out, and he's a guy that's talented, can bust a run too. I just think he's a prime fade for me just based on the way that he's been used the last 6 games, and I think he's going to be really popular, and I think that I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that as kind of a way to be a little bit different this weekend.
It's funny that somebody did a video recently about why it was the Gibson 2-touchdown week, which was against Detroit, I believe. Yeah. So he had 45 yards against Detroit.
Something that would happen, yeah.
But the video was basically about like you have to consider Gibson's upside because he scores all these touchdowns. And like and nobody was playing him that week. And so like that's why you play him. But like chalk Antonio Gibson sounds like a perfect GPP fade. So like because you're right, like he doesn't get any of the passing work, which is ridiculous, and just the regular pass or rushing volume is not there. It's not. You have Alex Smith under center. You're like, oh, they should just run the ball 25 times, and they don't. So yeah, I think that's the clear difference between the way that we play. That I'm like, everyone will have Gibson, so I'll just have him, and you're like, no way, why would I take him?
And good. I mean, he has a big game. He beats me, but I think it's a 3-game slate. You got to take a stand somewhere on some guys, and I think he's going to be the one for me. But then we've kind of gone long in running backs here, but a couple more. James Conner is the guy that like you can go to if you want to fade Gibson. It's scary because he looked really good last week. He was 13 carries for 89 yards, like a really good yards per carry, but then you see the 13 and the carries. You're like, what the heck's going on? That's a game they were winning, but they've just the last couple of weeks they've been winning pretty handily and have not run the ball. I mean, he has 15 or fewer carries in 4 straight games. He had 15 carries and 47 yards against Baltimore the first game a few weeks ago. Has played a lot of snaps. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. The snap count was down, but it's been back up the last couple of weeks. Baltimore's been run on the last couple of weeks. They have some injuries up front. Derrick Henry had 28 for 133 last week. Damian Harris was 22 for 121 the week before that. So the problem with going with fading Gibson is that means you probably have to go to Connor or Duke Johnson, who are both really scary. I think I'd probably move to Connor, but I got to figure that one out. The problem with fading someone is you got to figure out you got to play someone else instead who's going to do better, and that's slim pickings this week.
You didn't even mention the Benny Snell touchdown.
Oh, that was just disgusting.
I mean, not only did he only have 13 carries, but he lost the one inside the 5 rush that went for a touchdown.
Yeah. And then the name down here that obviously we're going to mention at the end is Gus Edwards. J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram aren't going to play this week with put on the COVID list. Gus Edwards is $4,000 on DraftKings, so he's like essentially minimum price. He was 16 for 87 and touchdown against Pittsburgh in Week 8, in a game that they ran for 200 yards against Pittsburgh. So I don't know if they know something about the Pittsburgh defense and playing all these years and allows them to run. That was just a freaky game. I don't know what it is, but he's just so cheap. I mean, you're talking about chalky. I mean, I think everybody's going to have Gus Edwards this week.
You don't think the matchup pushes people off enough?
I think that the price is so low.
It just doesn't matter. I mean, I guess if everybody jumped it.
I wish the other guys were better. So, like, if you're like, oh, I'm not going to play Edwards because I want to play someone, it's like are you really getting excited about paying extra money for Connor or Duke? Or, I mean, you get a lot of teams that go Zeke and Gibson, I think, so that those teams maybe don't play Edwards, but maybe play Edwards as a flex. I just think at 4,000, I think he's going to be everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, we played Mike Davis 4,000 against the Bucks, who also have a very good defense.
Yeah.
The benefit of Edwards, at least as a flex play, is that if you're like really far behind and expect him to be popular, theoretically you can just pivot off of him to a wide receiver in that game. 4,000 doesn't leave a whole lot. Maybe you can't even do that now that I've said that.
Baltimore
Des Bryant, great.
Baltimore should have no receivers over 4,000, so it should work.
Yeah. Oh, Miles Boykin. Oh, yeah. You can make up for it. I mean, obviously,
yeah, you can play Duvernay. Marquise Brown's only 4,700, so if you save some money in this slate, you could swap to him too if you wanted to later. I mean, he had 0 catches last week, so I don't know if you want to do that, but yeah, I think that's a really good point because you've got these 3 games that are spread out like this. You're going to be able to look and see where you are after the first 2 and kind of figure that out. I think that's an interesting play. If you needed to get different, you could swap off Edwards, but if you're doing well, you just leave Edwards in and let it ride. Yeah.
Do you have any Justice Hill hesitation?
The couple years ago I thought it was gonna be like a great season long play, so it's kind of scarred me. But I think I'm gonna play someone here. Edwards is so cheap that I'm just gonna play him.
Okay, yeah, because it was more like if you think Justice Hill outplays like Tony Pollard and Benny Snell and I guess Kerryon Johnson, like if he takes too much away from Edwards, it probably doesn't affect you as much as if Snell poaches another touchdown or Pollard scored last week too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I think Edward, like I'm guessing a lot of people go Gibbs, or at least in cash if they play 3 running backs. I don't think you necessarily have to play 3 this week. I assume the 3 are like Zeke, Gibson, and Edwards.
I think there's gonna be a lot of teams with those 3 running backs.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the passing games. First, a note from our sponsor, PropSwap. Smart sports bettors always know where to find the best odds before placing a bet, and that's why smart bettors use PropSwap. You can always find the best odds on PropSwap because you're buying directly from other bettors like yourself. See a ticket you like but you think the price is too high? Submit a bid for a price you think is fair, then buy it. PropSwap sellers are always willing to negotiate, and we all know bookies never will. And for a limited time, our listeners get up to $500 in bonus cash. Just use the promo code ROTO500, that's promo code ROTO500, and PropSwap will match your first deposit up to $500. Become a smarter sports bettor today. Go to PropSwap.com or download the PropSwap app. So, Andrew, I want to do quarterbacks pretty quick here. I'm playing Deshaun Watson at 7,400. I think I would never say fully across the board because I'm sure I'll mix in some other stuff, but I think on this slate, he is far and away the play for me. He's, take out that wind game against Cleveland that was weird. He has 280 passing yards in every other game, the last 7 games, except for that one. Multiple passing touchdowns in 7 of 8. He was awesome last week, but kind of shut it down at halftime, which is the point. He had 3 touchdowns at halftime and had 3 touchdowns for the game. So I kind of was hoping we're looking for an all-timer game there. But still, threw for 344, ran for 26. He has 35 plus rushing yards the last 25 plus rushing yards the last 4 weeks. So running the ball a little bit more after he didn't have more than 30 the first 6 weeks. Detroit's near the bottom in pressuring the quarterback and sacks. Like, this is a great matchup. I just think it's pretty easy for me this week. I think I'm going to play a lot of Deshaun Watson and then maybe sprinkle in some other guys, but it's going to be Watson a huge majority for me.
I think he's going to be by far the most popular quarterback on the slate. He's not. You said it earlier. He should be 9,000 on this. Yeah, like if this game was on the Sunday slate, like if we were talking about, we'll be back on Friday to talk about the Sunday slate. Like if he was 7,400 in this matchup, then we'd be like, yeah, I'd probably still play him anyway.
For sure.
And here we are on a 3-game slate. I think the biggest question you have is if you want to differentiate like how you do it, and just based off of the defenses, like I wonder if most people avoid the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game just because both of those defenses are very, very good, which then you're now like, all right, well, Matt Stafford against the Texans on Thanksgiving doesn't sound so bad. He's $1,600 cheaper than Watson. And I just don't see people playing Dalton or Alex Smith.
Yeah, I mean it's a 3-game slate, so you get some people in there. I mean, I guess if I had to, I'd probably play God, I guess I'd probably play Alex Smith just based on matchup instead.
That's funny. I thought you were going to say the opposite.
I like Dalton more because he has better weapons.
Right.
But like Washington killed him that first game. Like they had 46% pressures on dropbacks that first game against Dalton. Like he's just a sitting duck back there, and their pass rush is really good. I like their defense this week, so I'm not gonna. I probably don't go Dalton. Although the weapons are like, if they have to throw, he could be pretty good. But I don't know. I mean, Stafford just got shut out by Carolina last week. Like Carolina's not a good defense. Like Tom Brady killed them and then has done nothing in the two games on the other side of that. Like, I mean, Stafford was horrible last week. He was 18 of 33 for 170 yards, no touchdowns. It sounds like Kenny Galladay is probably not going to play. We don't know that yet. He didn't practice on Tuesday. Practiced a little bit on Monday, so we'll get more news on that. If he plays, that might open up a little bit for Stafford, but I don't know. As I get in here, I'm like, well, maybe I can shift to Lamar or Ben. But like you said, those defenses are really good, and Lamar looked bad again last week. He had the rushes. He had 13 carries again, but only 51 yards. What do you make of Lamar Jackson right now? I mean, are you tempted to pivot off watching him at all?
Certainly not in cash. I was going to say like the consideration for other quarterbacks. And even if you like throw Stafford out, because you're like, I just don't want Stafford, even though he has a perfectly fine matchup. So you look at the other two games, and we keep talking about like both Baltimore and Pittsburgh have really strong defenses, but like right now on DraftKings Sportsbook, that game is a 45-point total. Washington Dallas is 46. Like it's not all that different. Obviously, the quarterback prices are very different, but I think like the Baltimore passing game, whatever that actually is, Jackson and Andrews or Brown, like I think that is by far the lowest owned stack this week. Like I think there are many more people who will play Alex Smith and McLaurin or Dalton and whoever you want to put in there with either Gallup or Lamb. Like Stafford, I think we've seen people play Marvin Jones and Darvin Hall. Is that even his name? Marvin. They're both really
Marvin Hall. Yes.
Well.
Yes.
And Roethlisberger, like we talk about how sometimes the answer to which wide receiver do you take is all of them. I don't think this is necessarily that game, but like those guys are easy to stack. Whereas like I think people just tend to stay away from Lamar, other than Mark Andrews, I guess. I think like the Baltimore passing game is probably the most overlooked, especially because he's expensive. Like he's the second highest priced quarterback. Yep. What do you think?
I think so. I mean, you look at implied totals. Detroit is as high as the favorites in the other game. Like right. I know they're underdogs, and we're like, oh, Stafford, but they're 24.5. I think Pittsburgh was like 24 3/4, and Dallas was 24.5. Also, I think that. Yeah, I mean, Lamar's tough. I mean, he averaged 6.9 yards per carry last year. Now he's at 5.8. The thing with Lamar, though, is last year he had like 3 touchdowns a game. He averaged 2.9 touchdowns per game on the season. He's at 1.8 right now. He has 18 touchdowns, and that's combined. That's passing and rushing. I think he was like 36 and 7 last year. He's 10 I forget what the breakout is, but he has 18 touchdowns in 10 games right now. It's just he's just not scoring touchdowns. He's not breaking those big plays. We talked about joking around with Cook earlier, but like every week last week, it felt like Lamar had that 30-yard touchdown or that 50-yard run where he was out at the 10. Like, it's just the big chunk plays aren't there right now. And you can't overlook the fact that he was awful against Pittsburgh last game. And I think that, Tomlin is really smart. Their defense is really good. He was 13 of 29 for 208 last time against Pittsburgh. Like, he was terrible. We watched that game because we talked about that game a bunch a few weeks ago. And it was a game that Pittsburgh won and Baltimore should have won because they had a ton more yards, but they turned over. I think Lamar had 4 turnovers himself. It was a horrible passing percentage. But they had a ton of yards, but last week I played some Lamar because I was like, it's finally time, and it didn't work again. And I don't know. I think I want to see it once before I do it. And I can't. I get it in GPP if you want to shift. I probably will have a lineup with him in, but my main lineups they'll just go up $600 to Deshaun and call it a day. Yeah,
I think Lamar is going to be the guy that if you can withstand the losses through 17 weeks, maybe you get it on the 17th and it all makes up for it. You just got to make sure you're not broke before then.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the weeks, and he's played 10 weeks. He's been quarterback 15 or lower in 6 of those weeks.
Ooh.
Like last year I promise you didn't have 6 all year last year.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's top. I think he's quarterback 8 or better in the other 4 games. So he has had some bigger games, but no big ceiling games. Like he hasn't had those huge games. Last year did every single week. I mean, he talked about last week, like we just throw in Lamar in cash and you're good. And it's just not the case. And I don't know if it's the way they're calling offense, he's obviously inaccurate right now. He's missing a lot of plays, and Marquise Brown had 0 catches last week. They're not using their weapons at all, and I don't know. I just don't think at Pittsburgh at night in a big game is the spot that I wanna try and find it.
Yeah, the weird thing, I mean, the touchdowns obviously are playing like a huge role because, like even last season with his huge games, he didn't necessarily throw for a ton of yards. Like,
yep.
Like I'm looking now. He had a game with 222 yards and 4 touchdowns, 169 and 5.
I remember that game. It was crazy.
Yeah, 212 and 5. Like it's just I was against the Jets.
They aren't hitting those like, oh my gosh, the defense is putting 14 guys in the box and setting someone wide open anymore. It's just not there right now. And I don't know if people realize he's not accurate or people realize that they can play the run a little different. But it's just those big easy touchdown passes don't seem to be there.
Yep, totally agree.
It's funny, you look at his yardage, and like through 10 games, the yardage is not that far off. It's really the touchdowns that's doing it. So.
Yep.
Let's jump into those receivers. But first, a note from our other sponsor, BetMGM. Sports bettors know that magic happens when you turn a hunch into action and apply the right amount of expertise. That's why BetMGM has teamed up with RotoWire to offer new BetMGM customers a free 6-month RotoWire subscription when they place their first bet. Register on the BetMGM app or the website, and once you make your first sports wager, you'll receive a season's length of RotoWire's unmatched sports insights. Find out why BetMGM is the king of sportsbooks by signing up and placing your first bet today. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years or older to wager. Colorado, Indiana, New Jersey, Nevada, Tennessee, and West Virginia only. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado and Nevada. 1-800-GAMBLER in New Jersey and West Virginia. In Tennessee, call or text the red line at 800-889-9789. If you or someone else you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. Promotional offer is not available in Nevada. So, Andrew, we got the wide receivers this week. I really like the ones at the top. I like that I built some lineups when I was playing around with it yesterday with McLaurin, Will Fuller, and one of the Pittsburgh guys. And it fit pretty well. None of those guys are overly expensive. McLaurin's $7,000 at the top. Fuller's $6,400, and then Deontay $62, Claypool's $61, Juju's $59. We finally got Deontay as the most expensive Pittsburgh receiver. It took 10 games. I love McLaurin this week. I think that he'll obviously be super popular. I'm big on Will Fuller this week, though. That's my big feel this week, and I think I like Will Fuller over Cooks this week and pay the extra price.
Why?
Just have a feeling.
Oh, all right. No actual sense into it. It's just.
No, there is some sense into it to me, of course. There's always something, right? Detroit's allowed 3.6 receptions of over 20 yards per game. I think they're just an offense that can't stop the big play receiving. And when I think of that, when I build these two offenses, I think Cook's a little more in the slot, kind of catching the quicker ones. I think Will Fuller's the deep guy here. So I think that the way this game matches up playing against Detroit, it matches up better for a deep kind of attack. Obviously Cooks can score every time. I do like both of them. But I think a lot of people will go Watson Cooks because it's $1,100 cheaper than Fuller. So I'm gonna go heavy Will Fuller this week.
Would you consider both Cooks and Fuller?
For sure, I would. If you're gonna stack it, I think that you go both, and then you come back with Marvin Jones or Galladay if he plays. I don't think he's going to, or your boy Darvin Hall / Marvin Hall.
My fault, Darvin.
I think playing both is a very real possibility. I think what I'm going to do, not to spoil later, is I think I go Watson, Fuller, Jordan Akins for the Houston stack because I like how Akins looked last week. I like how they used him. I like how cheap he is more than anything. And I think that if I'm going to save some money somewhere and kind of get everybody else in I want, tight end's a good spot to do that. So I don't dislike Cooks. I just have a really good feel that we see a lot of Will Fuller action this weekend. Okay,
that's fair. That's reasonable. That's more than just you just feeling it.
I know. I wanted to give you the feel, but I actually did put some thought into how the game works out and what goes on here.
And now that Deontay Johnson is the most expensive, even though there's only a $300 gap, does that push you to the other guys?
It doesn't. I mean, it's funny. I think that as you look at the slate, picking the correct Pittsburgh receiver is going to decide a lot. I think you're not going to be able to play all of them. One of them's going to go off. One of them's going to be a little more quiet, and one will be in the middle. It's just kind of probably the way it works, except for that 1 week where they all were good. But last week it was Deontay had all the targets, Chase had the touchdown, and Juju did nothing and stepped on the referee's flag and tweaked his ankle, which was the strangest injury I've ever seen. I just think, Deontay had 16 targets last week.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. They're not deep targets, but they just use them. So he used 12 for 111, and you go PPR, and that's just, you don't have to score if you're going to do that. And he has six double-digit target games. His one bad game was against Baltimore, but he left the game early that week. He only had 3 targets. He left it early, went to the blue tent, and came back in. And I just don't know if he fully checked back in and was fully feeling good. But I wouldn't argue with anybody that wanted to go Claypool. He has 10 touchdowns in his first 10 NFL games at the same price, essentially the same price. I'm gonna still go Deontay with the targets.
What do you think the chances are that the answer is none of them?
Always possible.
Like an elite
I think
Ravens secondary.
I think one of them has to do well. With the amount of times Pittsburgh has 46 passes the last 2 weeks, each of the last 2 weeks, and that's games they're winning. I just think they've kind of abandoned that, and I think they're going to throw so much that someone in this game is going to have to do well. And with the other games on the slate, I think you're going to want at least one Pittsburgh receiver in there. There's always ways to build, but I just think with the way they pass, I think one of them's going to hit. Now, picking the right one might be hard. You could, if people pick the wrong one, that hurts. But I just think they're all three are so good that I'm going to go Deontay or Claypool. I'm tossing Juju out. He partially practiced on Tuesday. I just think the other guys have bigger ceilings, and if you're playing in a GPP 3-gamer, you want that ceiling. You look at Claypool's targets: 9, 13, 10, and 8 the last 4 weeks. He hasn't been over 5 catches though, so he's clearly the guy they take some shots with.
Yeah.
He scored last week. He scored against Baltimore the first time. But I'm going Deontay 6,200 in a lot of a high percentage of my lineups.
Okay.
Do you think zero's an interesting path though? It seems like.
Matchup wise, it's got the lowest total on the slate, and they are facing the best secondary on the slate. I just think
PPR, you're just gonna get a lot of targets, you're gonna get a lot of passes, and I think in a full PPR, I think they just get there to a good amount.
It's a fair assessment. The Cowboys seem really cheap.
They do.
Cooper at 5,700 seems egregious on a slate like this, on a 3-game slate.
It does. I have him bolded. He had 7 targets last week with Dalton, 6 for 81. I thought he would be 7,000. It's just, and I don't love Amari Cooper, but 5,700 with all those targets and an offense, in an indoor game, we don't have to worry about weather. He's just going to get targets, and under 6,000 that floor is just so good right there.
Yeah, the combination of Cooper and Cooks at those prices, I think that they'll be popular in cash, just because. The difference between Cooks and Fuller is pretty significant enough that people are like, I'll just take Cooks.
Mm-hmm. I hope so.
Yeah, right. And Cooper is the most expensive Cowboys wide receiver. Washington's pretty good against has been pretty good against wide receivers this year. So I could see people not necessarily wanting to get in on that, but he's the best of the group. CeeDee Lamb being 300 less seems a little weird to me. He obviously has some big play potential, but I don't know. I don't necessarily see people going much below that. There are options below it for tournaments that you can try to exploit, but I think, like we said, the pricing is so soft that I don't think you necessarily need to go that cheap a wide receiver this week, because even if you pay up, Gus Edwards obviously helps that.
Right.
I think more people will probably find more value in Gus Edwards at 4,000 than any of the receivers at 4,000 or below.
Yeah, I agree there. It's funny. I looked at Lamb and I'm like, wow, he seems cheap. And then you look and his catches the last 4 weeks are 0, 4, 4, 4.
He's earned that low price.
He sometimes he's so good, and when you watch the game, he makes these big plays. You're like, oh my god, CeeDee Lamb's going off, and you look and you're like, 4 for 34. And you're like, well, how did that happen? He had a touchdown last week, so that obviously got him where he needed to be.
Yeah,
but
ridiculous touchdown actually.
Yes, it was. He's really good.
He's really good.
I love him as a player. I just I don't know. You give me 300 more for Cooper, and it's hard not to just go right there. But the cheaper guys you mentioned, I want to hit those real quick. really cheap, under 4,000. You want to talk about talent for price, and you've got Michael Gallup at 3,500. Again, in this offense, it's mostly Cooper right now, but he only has over 75 yards once all year. He had that one big game. I think we actually played that game too for some odd reason. But he just had 24 targets the last 3 weeks, only 12 catches on those. So he's, I think he's the deeper guy too, and maybe miss some targets there. But he plays a ton of snaps in an offense that has the second highest implied total behind Houston. And I don't know. I think if I'm going to go cheap in a GPP, I think it's going to be Gallup. I'm going to take a shot on just because I think the upside is very significant with him. It's low percentage he's going to hit it, especially the way the season's going. But he's so talented at 3,500, you can kind of see it happening pretty easily. If I'm going cheap, it's probably him over Kiki Kuti, who we mentioned earlier, like saying his name. But he's 3,400. If Stills and Randall Cobb don't play, he was pretty involved last week. Scored a touchdown, played 35 snaps, but still had 10 yards receiving. I think that the passing tree there is so much Fuller, Cooks, and tight end that I don't really go with Kuti. I'd play Gallup over Kuti if I was going cheap, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, which is annoying because I think we had a Brandon Cooks touchdown stolen by Randall Cobb last week, and then
we did.
But yeah, Gallup, just in terms of cheap upside, Gallup is so much better than all of the guys around him, and 3,500 is kind of an egregious price on such a small slate. But
yeah, I don't know why they put him all the way down there, but he's there.
He's there. Yeah, I mean, you can just keep going down the list. We obviously get to the very cheap Baltimore guys, but it's if you're going to do that, I think that's the point. It's would you rather have Duvernay, who he's kind of interesting because he returns kicks, and not to say he's going to score touchdowns because of that, but that makes me feel a little bit better about it because I know he's going to get the ball at some point. You don't have to totally worry about targets. They're obviously very low percentage opportunities at touchdowns, but at least the ball is in his hands, and you have to have the ball in your hands to score a touchdown. So he's one that I would take him over Miles Boykin just because I'm not sure that 1 or 2 targets that Boykin gets are all that valuable anyway.
Or the 0 on 34 snaps the last 2 weeks. Yeah,
right. There could be that too. But yeah,
what about Dez?
Is he even active?
He was last week. He had a pretty important catch late in that game.
Yeah, I thought he went back down to the practice squad on Monday.
He had 5 targets last week.
Yeah.
More than Marquise Brown.
They have to. You can only call a guy up twice. So if they call him up again this week, then any subsequent time they got to sign him for the rest of the season, which means they have to cut somebody. We learned that from last week when who was it? The Seahawks didn't bring Alex Collins back. I remember because they'd already brought him up twice. So Bo Scarborough got the game there. But anyway.
Is Dez Bryant the most accurate quarterback in Baltimore?
Maybe.
Sorry, Lamar. I love you.
No, I think.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I just think if you're anywhere near there, then you're just going to play Gallup. But for cash, I don't think you're even in this range.
I just don't think you need to. There's just
that's what it is. You don't need to.
There's no point to get down there. I think that those cheap Baltimore receivers become interesting if you want to be a little different and go with that Baltimore stack and kind of play a low percentage kind of thing where you go Lamar and Marquise Brown or you go Andrews and maybe one of the cheap guys or something like that. I mean, it certainly could work if they, the old school 2019 Ravens show up and it's the NFL, that can happen. So that's the way I think you get to those guys. But in a general here's my best lineup, it's hard to play any of those guys.
It's impossible.
Yeah. Tight end is, we just mentioned Mark Andrews. He's the most expensive, 5,200. He's come on a little bit the last 2 weeks. We talked about how Marquise Brown's got disappeared. Andrews has really been the guy. 5 for 96 2 weeks ago, 7 for 61 last week on 9 targets. Didn't do much against Pittsburgh for the first game. He's never topped 50 yards against Pittsburgh, actually, I think he's played 4 games against them. Clearly the most talented tight end on the slate, though. If you want to pay up, he's kind of the guy you go to. You get the night game, prime time, all that fun stuff. I think that this is the spot that I'm going to pay down a little bit. I mentioned Jordan Akins, but how are you feeling about tight end this week? It's slim pickings like always, but even more so this week. Yeah,
the looser pricing makes you consider Andrews a lot more.
It does.
So I think he's going to be popular. I think he's going to be the most popular tight end just because you don't necessarily need. You don't need the cheap one. Again, this is a Gus Edwards thing of how much he opens things up. But looking at the wide receivers in the 5,200-ish range, obviously Marquise Brown is there, but CeeDee Lamb is 54, Jones is 55, Marvin Jones. So like Andrews is better than those guys, particularly of late. Andrews last week reminded me of like every tight end who ever plays the Jets, that like every time he caught the ball, he was just wide open. Like there was no like contested, like all of a sudden you're just like, how did he get so open? And you like watch the linebacker take 3 steps and then he's like, I'm sure the safety's got him. And it's like, nope, the safety's over here. And he's just like, Andrews just wide open.
Or you could be the Raiders safeties and just run away from Travis Kelce at all times, no matter what. So same thing.
Right. I think there are basically 3 that people will consider, at least in cash games. I think it's Andrews, Logan Thomas, and Akins.
Okay.
And Thomas and Akins, I mean, it's a $600 difference, so it's not nothing. But Thomas is like one of these guys that people play every week because he's cheap and he gets 5 to 6 targets. And this week he's cheap and might get 5 or 6 targets. So nothing's really changed. But Akins, like yesterday, last week's game, just like if you saw that, you'd be like, oh, this guy should be 5,000, and because obviously Watson likes him. I mean, it's a 1-game sample, obviously, but I agree with you. I think that's a really good price, particularly a great price, like 2,900. Coming off 6 targets. Why not?
Yeah, he had 83 yards. He passes the eye test. He looks like that athletic tight end, and he doesn't play a ton of snaps. They use Darren Fells in running situations, and he only played 31 snaps. But I mean, he's a cheap option on the highest implied team total on the slate, and he's a good guy to stack with your quarterback. You mentioned the 3 tight ends. Do you think that in cash games like Hawkinson, nobody will have him just because if you take him, you're just going to pay up to Andrews anyway? Yeah,
like that 500. It's just there's not enough of a gap that. I mean,
I feel like TJ Hawkinson should be a thing and just like doesn't quite get there. He has 7+ targets in 3 of the last 4 weeks, so he's used a bunch. He was 4 for 68 last week. Like I could kind of see that path, especially if Galladay doesn't play. I think in a GPP, if you want to be a little different and go off Andrews to Hawkinson, I think it's an interesting play. As maybe he actually might be the comeback if you have a Houston stack. You come back, you don't play Akins on that stack. You go Cooks and Fuller, and then you come back with Hawkinson on the other side. It could be an interesting way to play that game.
Yep, I think that's a good one. You know who had 1 fewer target than him last week and a touchdown?
Dalton Schultz.
Dalton Schultz. I don't think anybody will play him, and I think he's fine. I think if you're going to play Schultz, why wouldn't you just play Thomas or Akins?
Yeah, Schultz has 21 targets the last 3 weeks, but hasn't topped 55 yards since week 4, and he clearly needs a touchdown to work. He's clearly their short guy. It's not like it was earlier in the year when he was kind of running down the seam with Dak. It's just that's not the way their offense runs right now. And similar type guy. The other guy in the slate we haven't talked about is Eric Ebron. Same kind of thing. He has to score the touchdown. He hasn't topped 55 yards all year. He only has over 5 catches once, but he gets the touchdowns. He gets in the red zone every once in a while and scores, and he's like the definition of TD dependent.
Yeah, I mean, really they all are except maybe Andrews. Like Andrews could outscore them all without a touchdown, even if they all scored touchdowns.
He's the one guy that can go 7 for 92 and not score. It can work.
Exactly. And so. Like that's why he's the most expensive, and also why it seems crazy that you would pay 47 for Hawkinson when you can just pay 52 for Andrews.
So last but not least, we have defense here. We've got Pittsburgh's 4,200 on DraftKings. Washington is 3,700. I almost messed that up. Goodness. Dallas is 28. Houston's 27. I probably wouldn't play the others. I don't think I guess you could play Baltimore, but against Pittsburgh, that's tough. What are you going to do with defense this week? I think that I'm going to play the Washington football team at 3,700 on most lineups. 10 sacks the last 3 weeks. They forced 2 turnovers last week. Dalton only got sacked once last week, but Dallas had 6 sacks Washington 6 sacks against Dallas the first game. I just think I'm going to ride with that. And Dalton is a guy that's not mobile in the pocket. I think that the Washington pass rush here is the defense I like the most by a good amount.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you could play the Cowboys too, like in the same game.
They did. Yeah, they have 6 sacks and 6 turnovers to combine the last 3 weeks. They've come on a little bit, and Alex Smith was always willing to make a little bit of a mistake. Right.
I mean, he's not really throwing all that far downfield, but if you think Dalton is not mobile, then Smith isn't going to be racking off any long runs here. So,
and you look at Detroit, like they got shut out last week at Carolina, but Houston only has 1. I think they have 1 turnover forced the last 3 weeks, and. But I guess you could do it. I mean, Detroit allowed 5 sacks this week. You could play Houston, but the Houston defense just does nothing.
Like, right, you can do it. I think I wouldn't be surprised if I played the Houston defense more than any other defense this season, just because they're always fairly cheap.
And you're like, they have JJ Watt. Like, good stuff has to happen at some point, right? Like, you're so used to 99 making plays, but like it just doesn't happen for their defense right now.
They have 5 turnovers forced all season.
Wow, that's just awful.
5.
Wow. That's really like you think you just like random lucky fumbles at some point you're going to recover some of those, right?
This is crazy. They had 2 fumble recoveries against Jacksonville in week 5. They had a pick and a fumble in week 6 against Tennessee, and they had an interception in week 9 against Jacksonville.
So they played like 7 games without a turnover then.
Yes.
Oh gosh. Wow. That's pretty wild. Pittsburgh defense, they did have 4 sacks and 4 turnovers against Lamar the first game. But Lamar doesn't usually turn the ball over. They only have 1 turnover combined, or 1 turnover each of the last 3 weeks, and only 5 sacks allowed total. So that game kind of was an outlier for them. But Pittsburgh defense could do something at any point. The Baltimore defense, same kind of thing. Like Ben could obviously make a mistake, and Baltimore defense is really good. But I think I'm just going to go Washington in a game where I think I can attack that offense a little bit, attack Andy Dalton. But it's a weird week. I think you could go like 4 or 5 of the defenses, and I wouldn't really argue very hard against you.
I think you could play all of them. Like if you told me that opening Lions-Texans game started off with a Lions kickoff return for a touchdown.
Could be.
Who knows? Like in GPP, if you're like, oh, I can't play this guy that I really want to play unless I play the Lions, just play the Lions.
I hear you. Detroit's probably the defense I wouldn't play, but yeah, I wouldn't sit an offensive player on a 3-game slate to find a defense. I agree there. So
right. Well, here you go. Would you play like the Steelers and Brandon Cooks, or would you play the Lions and Will Fuller?
I'm not taking Fuller out, so that's my answer on that.
Oh, all right. So there you go.
Will Fuller.
Welcome to the Lions defense.
Will Fuller's going off this week.
All right.
It's going to be that's the 9 a.m. game in the West Coast, and I think by about 11:15, if you don't have Will Fuller, you're shutting down the live DraftKings scoring for the weekend. There you go.
I love it.
Thanks everybody for listening. We've gone way too long. Sorry, you have something else?
No, I'm good.
All right, we've gone way too long on a 3-game slate, but kind of what we tend to do. Hopefully everybody enjoyed the extra bonus podcast. We'll be back at you on Friday morning. We're doing Friday morning, right? You're not on vacation or anything this week? All right, good. We'll do Friday morning with the rest of the games for the full Sunday slate. Thanks for listening. Please rate or review the podcast if you get a second. If you want to follow Andrew on Twitter, he's at RotoWire Andrew. I am at Scott Jenstad. We'll be talking football a bunch of the weekend on there too. Hope everybody has a fantastic Thanksgiving. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll be back at you in a couple days talking the Sunday slate. Take care.